let's get started.
Okay.
So first of all, let me start by welcoming all of you to this panel. I'm thrilled to be doing this and really excited to learn from the experiences from our panelists here. So I want to introduce you to everybody we have on board. So we have Felipe Matos, who is a board member at Dinamo and Associação Brasileira de Startups, as well as an advisory board member at Startup Genome. He's coming from Brazil. We have Mariano Mayer and he's the founder of Marea Venture Partners. And before that, he used to head entrepreneurship policy for both the National Ministry in Argentina and before that for the city of Buenos Aires. Excuse me. And Rocio Fonseca, who is Chief Innovation Officer at the Chilean Economic Development Agency. And before that, she was Executive Director at Startup Chile. So welcome on board, and we're excited to do this. My name is Arnobio Morelix. I'm Chief Innovation Officer at Startup Genome, and we're a global advisory firm working with innovation policy leaders around the world. In synergy with this, I also serve roles with Stanford University and Inc. magazine, and I am a Brazilian guy calling from San Francisco. And since I'm here in California, it also means that I woke up at 1 a.m. today to be at the start of the event. So bear with me, please, if I'm a little slow. In a way, it feels like a very
Do you have
authentic.
coffee, Arnobio?
Yeah, I have plenty. Yeah, a lot.
That's a very small.
Yeah,
exactly. I'm usually jet lagged at conferences, so this feels very authentic. Some broader notes as we get started. You see on the chat a few links. So if you want to reach out to Startup Genome with questions or expressions of interest, you can click there. We're also hosting several webinars in the next few weeks to go into more detail about a lot of the topics we're covering on this conference. So sign up there if you're interested. Today, we launched the Gstr 2020 Global Startup Ecosystem Report. You can also check it out there too, download it. And then we also have an expo, and that's in the left side of your screen where you can talk with folks at Startup Genome if you want to do that. And before we share some questions with the panel, really just to set the tone, I want to share two statistics from the Global Startup Ecosystem Report, which we published today. Number one is about democratizing the tech economy. And I've been shocked to see the extent in which that has happened in the past few years, both in my work at Startup Genome as well as my previous role at the Kaufman Foundation. And here's an example of that. In 2013, when the term unicorn became popular, there were just 4 ecosystems that had produced a unicorn that year. Today, and since then, there's over 80 ecosystems have produced unicorns or billion-dollar exits, which is quite impressive. And then number 2 is 4 out of 10 startups globally are in what we call the red zone. They have 3 months or fewer of capital. And as we're going to talk about both the impact and the recovery from COVID-19, I wanted to share this to influence set the tone for some of our discussion. And to get us started, Felipe, I know you've been leading work with the Inter-American Development Bank, as well as working closely with startups. What are the most surprising things you're learning about the impact of COVID-19 on the ecosystem?
Well, thanks, Arnobio. And good morning, everyone. This is Brazil. It's morning. I have been engaging with the IDB to understand the impact of the crisis specifically for the startup ecosystem in Brazil. And if we compare what has been happening here with the rest of the world, you see, well, first we have the pandemic hit us a bit later, and this has pros and cons. In the good side, we were able to learn a lot from other regions on what to do, and specifically the startup ecosystem is very globalized in a sense that we all talk to each other, to prepare the companies and move everyone to home office and things like that. But in terms of public policy, I would say that the crisis has just accelerated and everything and exposed the gaps. So the gaps that we had before are just more exposed right now. So if we didn't have a good system to fund entrepreneurs with debt options for startups because they are more innovative companies. They don't have a track record of cash flow that's sustainable sometimes, so they don't match well the criteria of a credit score for traditional banks. And this was a problem before. Now it became a huge problem because they don't have access to credit in a critical moment. So when it comes of policies, I would say that all the gaps that we have, and we had some structural gaps in Brazil, and I believe that some of them extend to the rest of South America, some may not. Those gaps just became more prominent because of the moment in the pandemics. But I would also say that on the good side, we have governments thinking on recovery and on policies to recover, and I see this as an opportunity to push for some changes and some policy changes that are more structural than actually emergency actions. I mean, we do have some emergential policies as well to help the people, especially the smaller businesses, to overcome the crisis. But I think that the best opportunity that we have with the crisis is to really push for some structural changes that we've been pursuing for a long time, and this may be a good momentum to use the need for those changes to leapfrog in terms of some gaps that we have on policies for startups.
That's pretty interesting on the crisis exposing the existing gaps and exacerbating them. Rocio, what are some of the things you're seeing in Chile and key initiatives that the Chilean Economic Development Agency and maybe the government more broadly have been implementing?
Well, I just want to give you a little bit of context, because before COVID-19, we had a social crisis in Chile in October. So we have been dealing with two huge waves that are the social crisis, the COVID, plus the economical crisis that is already coming, plus the fourth one that is climate change, right? So Chile is one of the most affected one. And when you have to think about the strategies and how are you going to solve the huge problem, I think you have to cut it in slices, right? And start working in different teams in parallel. So some of us has to work in the short terms, like shutting down the fire, and you cannot forget the medium and long term in terms of innovation, added value, sustainability, right? So the things that we are working today, it goes directly in thinking in short, medium, a large term. And today, we're working in France with the Chilean Economic Development Agency, giving credits like a second-tier bank. So if a startup or an SME wants to have a credit through the bank, we can provide the support of the guarantee, right? So we have more than 1 million SMEs in Chile, and we want to help them to support their business during the crisis, right? That's the basically one, and how can you survive to this moment. And the second one, I will say, it's about how can you collaborate. We have been doing a lot of connections between large corporations and small companies, for example, or connect supply and demand, or connect potential partners. Because if you think everything is about collaborate when somebody needs help, right? So for example, you have the fruits and vegetable fairs and nobody's going because you have the quarantine. So what happens if you put these guys to collaborate with the taxi drivers, and they can get, because they are not working, because nobody's on the streets, so you can collaborate with each other and take the fruits and vegetables to your houses, right? So we have been working in a lot of fronts, just through credits or just connections between people that can complement each other and complement the skill to go further. And finally, of course, we always have grants that support entrepreneurship and innovation, that are the ones that we have always been working on. So we are working in different fronts, and it's not just about the COVID. I think this is longer than COVID-19. We have 4 waves, and we have to work as a team in parallel in those 4 ones.
Great. And a note before we move to the next question: if you have any questions you want to ask the panel, please share on the chat, and then we'll share some of those with the panel here. Mariano, you changed recently from being a policymaker to being a founder early this year, right? And we're just talking about that. And, especially now they have this experience as a founder in these very interesting times. What are some of the things that policymakers just do not get about the entrepreneurial process that you wish they did?
Okay, well, first of all, pleasure to be here with you, Felipe and Rocio, friends, and also I'm a fan of what they have been doing in Brazil and Chile, so it's a pleasure. Yes, I ended my mandate after 7 years in public service. In 11th of December, I started. I'm back in the private sector, and starting this consultancy firm called Marea Venture Partners. I've been out of events and conference and everything for 6 months. This is my first appearance. It was like a sabbatic. But I mean, it's like similar to what Rocio was mentioning. It's a complex time in Argentina in that sense, because the new government, which from a different political sign, was just starting. So they were just starting when the crisis arose. So it was difficult for them also to start with the new plans or what they were doing. So it's a mix of dealing with the crisis and also trying to do some of the new things that they would like to do. So they are doing with tax exemptions and subsidies for the salaries, all the typical measures to deal with the crisis that they are doing. And from the new things, I think the most interesting is probably a program about open innovation, similar to what Rocio was mentioning. Very interesting program about that. I think it's also a very special moment to do that. And most of the corporations are really open to working with startups now. So it's a good timing or momentum to do that. And regarding policies, maybe something that we were talking with Felipe before the conference is, and it's also difficult for policymakers, is legacy. I mean, which is complicated for entrepreneurs also. It's very typical when there is a change of government that you want to do your own things on your own way. So the arbitrage between maintaining good things and doing your own things, it's an interesting conversation. So the ecosystem is having this conversation now with the new government. And of course, it's not easy, but I mean, I think it's a challenge for policymakers to try to the fine tuning between doing your own things and with your own touch of the things, but also trying to keep the good things that we're doing before. It's especially complex because entrepreneurship is usually transversal issue. So sometimes it's easy for you when you have a vertical to keep some things, but if it's difficult when you have different silos in government. So maybe an agency or is continue things, but there are other agencies or that are not doing. In Argentina, we are having that conversation right now, especially with the and maybe related with Felipe. One of the interesting things that we done when we were inspired by Chile of establishing a new kind of corporation for startups, which was approved, the simplified corporation, the SAS. It was approved and implemented, and it was a success for startups. Brazil was trying to do it, Uruguay did it, and now in Argentina it's been under challenge. Not by the entrepreneurs agency, but by other agencies. So I think my recommendation maybe for policymakers would be especially that. I think it's very important to try to maintain some things. The legacy is very important because otherwise, if you are changing all the time, the doing business and the regulations for startups, it's even more challenging than having a startup per se, which is already difficult, especially with a crisis.
So I think it is a very interesting point, and one of the things that came up earlier is that, everybody's having the COVID-19 public health crisis, right? But we have a few other ones on top of that, unique to our corner of the world. And I think this institutionalization of policies is a similar thing. Every country has that problem to some extent, and then the Ministry of Education, of Industry, of Science and Tech, they all want to talk about entrepreneurship, right? And aligning those is tough. And it's, at Startup Genome, when we work all over the world, we see that, in Europe, in Latin America, in Asia, everywhere. But then again, it seems harder in Latin America. Rocio, we heard from Mariano, and we also actually were talking about this earlier, that Chile seems to be doing a better job at that than some of the neighbors. So like how come, what are some of the things we can learn from the Chilean experience on institutionalizing policy?
You know what? I really like the point that bring Mariano about legacy. I think we have to learn a lot in terms of that, because when wings change, the entire policy can change. And as Mariano said, entrepreneurship is maybe is not so discussed, or even innovation is not so discussed that I would like. But definitely, Chile is doing very well, in terms of policies that help startups, that create new companies super fast. Given this credit, we have CORFO, the Chilean agency that helped the economic growth. But I will say that we really lack of startups that are going into the unicorn goal, right? Or we lack of venture capital. So we have already the policies, guys, but the private sector is not so risk taker. So the lack of our culture in terms of investing in venture funds has been a really painful thing, right? So I love the country because the entrepreneurial policy has been very straightforward the last, 15 years maybe. But we still lack of the private sector. I think we are in Chile, we are very traditional, we invest in brick and mortar. So it has been very, very hard, even from the public sector, putting a lot of money in startups and venture capital and innovation to move the private sector. So I think that's one of the main challenges that we have. Yeah, we have been doing great in public policy, but not in the private sector. And that's the reason why the connection, the collaboration between big companies and startups is super important. How can you promote corporate venture capital, for example? So yeah, it's not just one thing. It's not just about public policy. It's about how can you connect with the private sector, with the universities, to start bringing and create added value to the entire country.
Rocio, just to add to your point, I wish we could have a Chilean policy on entrepreneurship with the Brazilian market. It would be heaven. Because it's actually, when I was hearing you, it's quite the opposite here. We are fortunate enough to have a big market and the private sector that is eager to do things. And we do have, we've managed to raise a lot of capital in the past 5 years for startups, but the policies, I would say that we're almost walking backwards in terms of policies, which is even worse because the rest of the world is improving, some better than others, and we, by not improving so much, we're actually becoming moving backwards in that sense, and I think that if you look at the legacy, I was the head of Startup Brazil program, and it was born a couple of years right after Startup Chile, and the program didn't survive through administrations, and I think that when you look at what you were able to do in Chile, and of course some aspects of the policies will change, but the policy is maintained. There's some institutionalization of it, sort of, and when you don't have it, it's not only the problem of legacy, but also it's really the learnings. Because you lose the project, you lose the people, you lose all the learnings, and you have to start it all over again. Yeah. So
we have that problem with startups, right? You have the lack of policy, we have the lack of private sector. So what's going on with the good startups that are growing here is they go out to US or Brazil or Mexico to get their funding, right? So you're losing very good human capital and very good Chilean potential because the lack of the private sector.
Yes. Well, in Argentina, when we started some of those things a couple of years ago, one of the triggers was that I don't know if like 20% or 25% of the startups of Startup Chile were Argentinians, that they were going there for funding.
So a lot of them are still here, huh?
Yes, I know.
Great. So to switch gears, let's talk a bit about the opportunities that we see with this crisis. And Mariano, you were talking about many of the opportunities of, the economy is digitizing, so that's more opportunity for startups. What are the key opportunities that governments should be looking at and take action on? And that ties into an audience question from Franklin Ribeiro, which is, if these are the opportunities, whatever they might be, how is your ecosystem taking action on them?
Okay. For who is it? For me?
So let's start with you, Mariano. Yeah.
Okay. Well, what I see, it's an acceleration of the digitalization that we were discussing in the G20 digital economy for 4 years about what would happen. Well, it's happening right away. We know it's for real, and it's now, with the good things and the bad things, of course. But what I see, it's in many of the value chains where there was an opportunity, but they were still reluctant to do it. They are doing that right now. What is interesting is that when e-commerce and everything started, the claim was that we were going to achieve like a B2C, direct and pure. And now, 20 years after, what we are seeing is that there is the opportunity of an engagement of B2C. But in the middle, it's like a B2B2C or B2B2B2B2C, where there are many opportunities of transforming those intermediaries. So, for example, in the agri-food vertical or value chains, when there was this explosion of last milers and the delivery, and you sort of digitalize the demand of food, then you can go backwards with all the value chains, and there are many opportunities or nodes where you can transform and not kill the intermediary, but transform it. Of course, that triggers and creates a more efficient and less frictioned value chain, which is, of course, less expensive, but you can give those intermediaries a new role. What we are seeing that, and of course, that is a big area where big corporations and startups could collaborate, as Rocio was mentioning, in finance, logistics, in of course marketplaces, in advertising and traceability, blockchain. So if you deconstruct that value chains in those areas, most of the corporations are really open to work with startups, and there it's something that governments or policymakers could also help. Usually there are asymmetrics of information; they don't know each other, so that is a particular area. Of course, there are some other value changes where it's more challenging: tourism, real estate. That with the pandemics they are more challenged, but in some others there are big opportunities. Agri-food, of course, financing, of course, and all this digitalization of the value chains.
Rocio, what do you see in Chile?
Well, I would say that something very nice is happening because you are forcing traditional companies to digitalize, otherwise they are going to die right now. And what's going on is the mix between startups and this kind of companies, right? So we are watching a lot of digital transformation in big corporations due to startups. They are connecting with each other, and I really, really love that. And another thing that is going on, it's about sustainability again. I think we have the huge challenge. Chile is one of the most affected countries by the climate change, so we have to do something. And we are watching a lot of connection between corporations and SMEs or startups to solve those problems. And third, I will say that we have a lot of challenges in terms of AgTech in general. We have a lot of agriculture, so we are watching a huge change there. But we are watching there like a movement to create value products, like in the food industry, based on these raw materials. Because Chile, we export mining companies, agriculture, and aquaculture without too many added value. So when you start to take those materials and transfer them into like a more added value products, it's good for the country. So I will say that those are the three main areas, and biotechnology will cross all the three of them.
Great. And what do you see in Brazil, Felipe?
I would say, well, the crisis has accelerated everything in terms of digitalization. So I would say there's a first trend of financial technologies like fintechs and new technologies to logistics that was already in place and that was tremendously accelerated. So, everyone is opening digital bank accounts in order to have access to the emergency fund lines. So we're like banking the unbanked at a much faster pace than it was happening before. And the logistics, I mean, all the startups that were working with logistics, like inserting technology to optimize the logistic processes, are blooming. And this was one of the main challenges that we had as well. There's a very inefficient logistics matrix, which is gaining a lot of traction as well. I did point out, though, that I see a new trend that wasn't that big before, and it's getting bigger now, on education and health. And those, I think, are two areas that are being super transformed by the crisis. Like education, like all schools are closed, all universities are closed, and they have to move to digital processes. And I've seen lots of new startups and lots of new investments in changing their structuring and adding more technology. In healthcare, like telemedicine wasn't even approved in Brazil before the crisis, and it is happening now. So we've seen lots of technology on medical care and exams, laboratories, and the whole process of health. I think the health sector is going to be profoundly changed after the crisis in different ways, and also in terms of technology. We've seen also many startups working with medical, like the chains and the supply chains are being transformed, especially in the medical sector.
Cool.
Yeah, those are like the main.
Fantastic. This officially concludes our panel. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining. As a South American guy, I really enjoyed learning about what's happening in Brazil, Chile, and Argentina. Thank you very much, everybody. And thank you to our panelists. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Mario. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.